Hello and welcome. My name is Madeleine Longoria Garcia, and these are our other stories. I'm here today with David Palazuelos. Welcome to the podcast. You are a father, a coffee professional, a son, and a community builder, and you're based in Tucson, Arizona. Thanks for coming on and joining. Yeah. I did change around your little intro there because yesterday when we were texting, I just wanted to share this. I was like, oh, we were talking about how to introduce you, what like resonated in terms of like a way to describe you. And I was like, you're a father, a son, a coffee professional, community builder. And your response just made me laugh out loud so hard because you were like Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I was just like, cannot. I was literally walking down the road and I just like cackled out loud and I could not do that in recording. And so, so I was like, you need to switch that up because that is too. Yeah.
That would have been funny.
Thank you for that, though. That was a good little like, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's always hard for me to do. I know a lot of people struggle with the same thing, like describing themselves or, putting themselves out there. So thank
And
you for
especially,
coming up with that.
Yeah. And of course, like so many of us are so used to like identifying ourselves professionally, right? It's like, oh, okay, this is the title I'm going to put out there. And I'm asking people to kind of think past that a bit more and not just tell me what is on your business card or like in your email signature, but how you would really kind of describe yourself to other people. So,
Yeah. Which is still something that as society we need to get used to, right? Like usually when you meet someone new, one of the first few questions is like, what do you do for a living? And that is what gives you a sense of identity, which shouldn't, but I guess that's corporate America for us. And that sense of identity and that sense of purpose can a lot of times be directly tied to our professional career and what we do for a living.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
We're more than just that, right?
Exactly. Yes. And this is the whole like premise of this project and this podcast is like to get beyond that and to create spaces where we can have conversations that I don't want to say like ignore what we do professionally or for a living, but don't make that the focus because we are so much more than that. And the way that we exist in our professional lives is definitely impacted by all of the other pieces of us. And so I feel like in my experience, and we met because of the coffee industry. I worked in the coffee industry for 15 years. We met because of that. And I feel like what I found for a long time in that industry is that like we so tightly hold on to our identities within coffee and don't really break past that in a lot of the conversations that we have with other people in that industry. And I feel like that is a piece that kind of brought me to building this project because I was like, yo, these people have no idea of so many other things in my life. And like, we don't ever have these conversations. We're not creating the space to have those conversations. We're talking about fucking brewing equipment and whatever coffee roasts, roasters and roasteries and all of this stuff that's happening. And it's like, okay, yeah, what about other things?
Yeah, I think I agree 100% with that. I think that's been my biggest challenge in coffee is how to move away from very transactional and superficial conversations to transcending conversations. And I think as part of my job, I'm in sales, but really I'm a people person and I'm a relationship builder. And for me, it's if I get to know you as a person beyond a grain buyer or beyond a roaster, then the byproduct of that will be eventually a sale. But that's not my primary focus, which is very countercultural in our industry, especially in the niche of field that I'm in. A
Yeah.
lot of it is transactional, a lot of it is superficial. And the work that it takes to get to know someone, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
is a lot harder than just,
Mm-hmm.
hey, what do you want? What do you need? Blah, blah, blah. That's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it does take a lot more energy. It does take a lot of it, and it's a two-way street too. People have to be willing to just talk about life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree
Yeah. And I
100%.
feel like that's something, the way that I have kind of observed you interacting with people, but also the way that you kind of show up is you do share these little insights into who you are. You're like little, I don't know if it's on a specific day of the week, but your meme dumps that are just so funny to me in your stories on Instagram. And it's like some of them I understand and relate to, and some of them I do not. But the ones that are just like, it's like you sharing a little piece of yourself of like, these are the things that are relevant in my life either
Yeah,
right now or are like jogging some sort of memory. And yeah, I've enjoyed that. It's been fun to watch it because they're not like coffee related. Your little meme dumps are like
everything.
so fun.
Yeah.
Just yeah. So
Yeah, thank you. It's funny that you mentioned that. Like maybe a month ago, one of my colleagues mentioned that to me. He was like, "You keep your Instagram very like personal. Like you
yeah,
don't hide who you are."
yeah,
And I was like, "Yeah, I think I just learned over time that the people that I the people that I want to see me for who I am, I
yeah,
want them to see for who I am.
yeah,
Like actually, I'm
yeah,
not just a coffee professional.
yeah,
I'm not just a dad, not just this dude that likes photography. I like to laugh. I like to make people laugh. Like the message from yesterday is a perfect example. Like I like to
yeah,
shoot the shit and take life serious, but also fun and enjoy what we have. And I think that is just also part of my personality. And I'm glad you enjoy those
oh, for
stuff.
sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, okay, because again, we met because of the coffee industry at an industry event. We were kind of working together on this thing. And then I mean, I feel like even at during that trip, we kind of talked about a little bit of things that we had in common or stuff like that. But then it was later on that I was like, oh, yeah, we have things in common as like our lived experiences in this country, in this world. And this is just, yeah, I don't think that, I don't know. I assume this is many professions, but I feel like in coffee specifically, we struggle with like breaking out of industry conversations with each other and showing each other a little bit more about who we are in different spaces where we've kind of been in our lives and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I don't know, it's special to experience that type of connection both with you and just with industry professionals. But
Yeah.
like I said, it takes work. And
Yeah.
sometimes, you have to be okay with the idea that people don't want that.
Yeah.
There's other people on my Instagram that probably don't appreciate the memes, and that's okay. That's also
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But there's people that do, and that's also really fun and beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can't please everyone.
No, never. I know. We all need to get over that for sure. Um, okay. So, as I've shared with you, okay, this is season one of our other stories. And because of the way that things are in the country and really in the world right now, I decided to really focus this first season on migration stories and people telling their personal stories or their family stories. And this is a sensitive topic, but the goal is really to show people, and I feel like I'm going to say this in every single episode this season, but show people that these threads of immigration stories are everywhere. They make up so many facets of our daily lives. These people are a part of our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our cities. And we don't realize, I think the majority of people in this country do not realize how close they actually are to people who are directly impacted by what's going on in the United States right now with all of the kind of like dehumanization that's happening. And with this, it's like you have community in many different places. And I don't know how often you really talk about this with people in your family's story of emigrating to the United States. I know that you recently did share something on your Instagram, and I just I wonder if some people didn't know that. I don't know what your experience has been. We haven't had this conversation before, and so I'm curious. I would like to, ask you if you can share your story. I know that you were very young when your family came to the United States. And I don't know if you know details before that, if you've had these conversations with your parents as well, to ask for more of those details of the story of what happened with who and when. Um, but yeah, can you kind of just give us an insight into that experience for you? And then I want to bring us back to some other conversation topics.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making this a safe space to really dive deep into these conversations, into these stories that can shine hopefully some light into the reality that we're living and
Yeah.
that we're experiencing. Um, it's truly devastating to see what's going on. Um,
Yeah.
and I think the hardest part of it all is navigating what that looks like for people without the privilege that you have and the lack of, I don't know, it's so easy to feel powerless in the middle of all of this and insufficient to help those in most need. And I think that's
Yeah.
what urged me to post that, mostly because there's a lot of people that probably don't know and they just assume that I was born in the States.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of people that assumed that, I don't know, that life somehow was perfect and,
Yeah.
you know, um, but yeah, I was born and raised in Obregón, Sonora, which is a really, really small town south of Hermosillo, which is the capital of the state. Yeah, grew up there, and came to the U.S. When I was 9 years old. I think I was in either third or fourth grade. Can't remember, but um, yeah, we came to the States. My dad, which is also not really common, but my dad had received an offer for a job.
Mm.
Um, so we came here with that in mind, right? Like a purpose, a life change, a
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is the best that I can do for my family. So we came here when I was 9, and we didn't really come. I mean, I think in our minds, the American dream was pictured in a very different way.
Yeah. Totally.
So we show
And
up
you
and
you
we're
all went to Tucson, right? That's
no,
where
we
you
actually
first met.
went
Oh.
to um, this really small town called Sky Valley. If you look it up,
Hmm.
it's middle of nowhere, but it's basically
Hmm.
really close to Palm Springs or
Okay.
Coachella, Desert Springs, Indio. So it's really
Got it.
remote area.
Yeah.
And that's basically where I grew up um, for about 7 years of my first period in the US was basically there. My probably one of the most formative um,
Mm-hmm.
times in my life was there. Um, and it was really shocking. I would even say like traumatizing in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was cultural shock, there was cultural barriers, language barriers
Yeah.
of all sorts. I have a sister, she's 4 years older than I am. Her experience was a lot different than mine. She was
Mm-hmm.
older, she was more conscious of what the move implicated. I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember. There's a lot of details that I don't remember.
Of course. Yeah.
I think I've tried to dive deep into that because of therapy. Therapy has allowed me to dive deep into that
Yeah.
passed, but there's still a lot that I don't remember. Like I don't remember being
Yeah.
asked if this is something I
Yeah.
wanted to do. I think it was just like we're just gonna do this and let's go.
Yeah.
And it was just like, all
Yeah.
right, we're moving to the States. I don't remember like even crying or being upset about leaving my hometown
Mm-hmm.
or my
Mm-hmm.
place of origin. But I do remember my sister being really upset and really against the idea of coming to the US.
Yeah.
And again, she was 4 years older than I was. Um, so her circle of friends was probably
Yeah.
more solidified than mine at that age. Um, my my dad is number 7 of 12. So
Yeah.
from that side of the family, I have like 54 cousins, and we're all super
Mm-hmm.
close.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean that's very Mexican, right?
Yeah.
And then so like
My grandfather was one of 12. And like, I don't even know how many cousins are on that side of the family.
yeah, it's wild. So
Yeah.
that alone was like its entire community, right? Like
Yeah.
I could go back to my hometown today and I have I can spend days just visiting my cousins and hanging out with them. So I think her circle of friends and her circle of like family, our cousins was really solidified. So her experience was a lot different than mine, but once we got to the States, in Mexico we don't have the yellow bus.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a bus that takes us to school. Like you either
Yeah.
get dropped off or you figure out a way to get at school.
Yeah.
And to me, something so basic as taking a bus to school was shocking. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean I have to go wait at a bus
Yeah.
station at like 6 in the morning when it's freezing cold outside and dark and get
Mm-hmm.
into a bus where no one speaks Spanish? Like,
Yeah.
I was in a very remote place. And the school that I went to was mostly white.
Yeah.
So even like I didn't even have ESL classes like English as a second language until
Mm-hmm.
later.
So did you speak any English?
No, nothing.
Yeah.
Zero.
So, and you were just like thrown right into school.
Yeah, nor did my sister, nor did my parents. So
Yeah.
it was like, go figure it out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, really traumatizing going to a school
Yeah.
where, first of all, like the school system is very different. Um, yeah, I have pictures in my head of like things and situations that happened, like the the bell.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't remember having that in Mexico. And I remember the bell went off probably my first or second day in school. And all the kids sat. Like all the kids just sat on the ground because it was a rule.
Yeah. Yeah.
The bell rings, you sit because that's like the way to show control or I
Yeah.
don't or like
Yeah.
organization. I don't know.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I remember just like standing there, like I don't know what people are doing, and I got in
You're like,
trouble.
what is happening all of a sudden? Yeah.
Like I got yelled at by
Yeah.
our teachers or whatever, and I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
what? Like what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
And again, it was like frustrating because they couldn't communicate with me and I couldn't communicate with them. And then I remember like going to lunch that same day, and then there's a line of people wanting to play tetherball. And I was like, we don't have that in Mexico either. Like, what sport is this? And I remember days later watching Recess for the first time, and I see that they're playing tetherball, and that the taller people always win. And of
Mm.
course, as a Mexican kid, I'm not the
Yeah.
tallest in my
Yeah.
class. So I'm like, I'm always gonna lose the game.
Yeah.
So I remember like in lunchtime, and I tell this story a lot because I couldn't socialize. I just didn't have the
Mm-hmm.
language to do so, nor the height to play tetherball. I remember just cleaning up. Like my best friends
Mm.
were the janitors because they're the only ones that spoke Spanish.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So for a long time, all I did during lunchtime was clean up. I was the kid at 9 years old cleaning my
Wow.
peers' lunch
Yeah.
table,
Hmm.
and I would get rewards for doing so.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I would get like, I don't know, candy or whatever the reward
Yeah.
was. I just kept going into the office to cash to cash my rewards for cleaning during lunchtime. And they knew me, I knew them.
Yeah.
And that was probably the first time since I got to the US that I felt semi-known or
Mm-hmm.
that I had other people to connect with.
Yeah.
My parents didn't know this, right? My sister
Mm.
was in a different school at that point. Um, yeah, because I think it was third grade or fourth, and she was 4 years
Mm-hmm.
older than I was. So she's already in middle school.
Yeah.
So she's not seeing this either.
Yeah.
And fortunately enough, the middle school that she had gone to, there was a more Latino school.
Mm-hmm.
So she wasn't really experiencing
Yeah.
what I was seeing on my
Yeah.
side.
Were these in different communities then?
So yeah, it's almost like a valley, and there's different schools in different metropolitan areas, like,
Sure.
suburbs essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can go to school to one city, but the middle school is in another city,
Yeah.
and so is the high school.
Yeah. It's pretty
And
common in rural areas in general. Yeah.
so that was my experience, and it was really, really hard. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember my dad just, you know, he was just like, I need to figure out a way for you to learn English because this is going to be hell for you.
Yeah.
And so he took me to a soccer practice for AYSO.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people will resonate with that. He took me to soccer practice with AYSO,
Mm-hmm.
and I hated soccer. I was so bad at it. Like I was terrible. Every time my cousins wanted to play when I
What?
was in Mexico, I was like, I'm not gonna play. Like my parents were never really sports people, so I really never, at that point in my life, I never played sports really.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna give this a try. Like, I hate soccer, but we'll figure it out.
You're like the first Mexican I've heard who say that they hate soccer.
It
Not
was
to make a
just,
generalization, but like, wow, I don't feel like I've heard any Mexican say that before.
I was just so bad at it that I
Yeah.
was, if you're bad in soccer, you're usually the goalie or defense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I never wanted to just stand there in the heat in Mexico and be defense for my 54 cousins. So, yeah, it was just like really terrible. And I remember, my dad was like, okay, we'll take you to the soccer practice. I don't know where he saw, I need to ask him where he saw that, but he saw an announcement somewhere of soccer
Yeah.
practice in X Park, and he
Yeah.
took me, and, we didn't know what AYSO was. We didn't know that it was that popular. Um, and I show up to practice, and everybody has like the best gear,
Yeah.
like the best cleats, the best shin guards, they know what's up. And I'm just like, again, feel like an outsider. Like,
Yeah.
my dad took me to Big Five to buy some random ass cleats to go to
Yeah.
practice because
Yeah.
that's all he knew too.
Yeah.
And again, everybody speaks English. So I'm just like, come on. Like, I need a break. This is
Yeah.
exhausting. But I realized over time that I was actually good at the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost incentivized me to learn English.
Hmm.
So soccer was actually the tool for me to learn English because it was a social. I
Okay.
associated, before that, I associated English to school, and school was a
Mm-hmm.
nightmare.
Yeah.
Therefore, language acquisition in school was going to be hell for me because I didn't really associate school with a good thing.
Yeah.
Nor did I associate English or
Yeah,
culture.
there was a negative association there
Yeah.
from the beginning. Yeah,
So
that makes
soccer
sense.
was the tool that actually helped me acquire English as a second language. And yeah, I became good at the sport, and that slowly over time helped me learn and understand and speak, and a little, going forward a little bit, my dad got a job at a campsite basically for
Mm.
schools, private Christian schools and churches to do like their retreats.
Mm-hmm.
So every weekend I was working. My sister and I were working every weekend because that's when the retreats would happen. All the Christian
Hmm.
schools and churches, that's when,
Yeah.
Friday through Sunday or Thursday through Sunday is when they would go out into the middle of nowhere, which is where we were, and
Yeah.
hold their camps.
Hmm.
So my parents were working. That was their busy season. I still remember like going by the trash bags, like the trash cans, with a black bag, and collecting like recycling plastic and aluminum
Mm-hmm.
so that I can buy my soccer cleats like everyone else did.
Wow.
So I was like
Yeah.
collecting like all these things that people were just throwing. Like it
Throwing
threw me
away. Yeah.
back to lunchtime, right? Like
Yeah.
it was like this parallel moment of, well, I was doing that during lunchtime. Like I was just the unseen dude just picking up the trash.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and so I would collect bags, over months because every weekend was just busy. So I was collecting these cans and would crash them with my feet and then put them in a bag. Um, and then my dad would just take me to the recycling center and I would get cash, and that's how I would buy my cleats or soccer ball
Yeah.
and practice
Yeah.
during the week, which is my downtime. And yeah, over time I got good at the sport, and I think that's what gave me for the first time a sense of purpose in this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, okay,
And a
well,
sense of community, I would assume, too, with that team. And yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. That was probably the first time I vividly remember and experienced, community and um, feeling a sense of belonging, feeling a sense
Mm-hmm.
of, okay. And yeah, once I got to middle school and high school, that was my driver. That was my
Yeah.
drive to excel in school and excel in sports, which was not the same story for my sister or for my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the story goes on, but
Yeah.
that
Well, can
is,
I ask,
yeah,
um, do you what job was your dad hired for that brought you all to Southern California?
basically like janitor or, I mean, it wasn't called janitor, but it was
Yeah.
basically in charge of the campsite.
So that
What?
was that
Yeah,
campsite job was the job.
yeah,
And then you and your sister ended up working there too.
yeah.
Yeah. Was there a like church connection?
Yep,
That okay.
yep.
Yeah.
So my upbringing is pretty much Christian. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is also not very common within the Mexican community. Most people are raised Catholic,
Yeah.
whereas for me, it's a little different being raised Christian.
Yeah.
Um, and that campsite belonged to the organization of the church that we were going to when we were in Mexico.
Got it.
So that was the job that my dad was hired for. My mom was hired as like an office assistant, which is similar to what she was doing already in Mexico. Um, and other cousins eventually were there as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
so other cousins were also in that campsite.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's that's how that developed.
Yeah. Was this in the 90s then?
This was, yeah, Yeah, in the 90s.
That's pretty, I mean, the way that you kind of describe your experience in elementary school, it was reminding me of some of the stories that my dad has told me about his experience in elementary school. I'm second generation here in the United States. My dad was born in the United States, but his first language was Spanish. And going to school and having to switch to English and having these memories of trying to, or yeah, having these memories of um, feeling like when he spoke Spanish or if he didn't understand something, he was in trouble, you know, and simply because he just didn't know what was going on, or his natural response was going to be in his native language. And then people were like, we don't know what you just said. And like this weird fear and like fear response. And oh, now you're going to be in trouble because we don't know what you said. And send you over to, I share in the first episode of this season just the story of him being sent to the principal's office and like this memory that he still remembers now in his 60s. You know, it's like this is a formative traumatic memory as a young child being reprimanded for speaking your own language. And so
Yeah, that did happen a lot during elementary for me.
yeah.
I was just taken to the principal's office, and I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah. And I guess the thing there is like, you know, my dad was born in the 50s. So he was experiencing this in the 60s in on the Central California coast, and also was like, you know, has these memories of being the only brown kid in his class. And here we are still 30 years later now in the 90s, and it's still the same kind of situation for non-white kids in the schools. And I just it's crazy to me that that environment persists, because we know that it is still that way in so many communities across this nation too. And there is, you know, even an increase of fear around what we don't understand or what the languages we don't know and what are they saying and all of this stuff, versus having this kind of especially with kids, like kind of this gentler understanding of this kid is in an environment completely unknown and foreign to them. How is there a way that we can actually foster a sense of community versus this feeling of being an outsider?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the hardest part, and even for me now, it was that I needed to change
Yeah.
in order to belong.
Yeah.
I needed to learn
Yeah.
in order to belong.
Assimilation,
Yep,
right?
exactly. Which
Yeah.
I know we'll get into this topic, but then it later happened in coffee for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and anyway, it's really
Yeah. And
wild.
it is wild. It's like having to put so much effort towards, I mean, really changing the way that we operate to fit into whatever neighborhood or school community or team or whatever it is, and then how that even continues later in our lives into adulthood, and again showing up in our professional lives, and how we have these realizations that like, ooh, I have to kind of like fit into this versus bringing myself into this and allowing that to like expand whatever this industry is, or meld it into a different shape. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think um that's something that I, for the first several years of my life in the coffee industry, did that too. Like felt like I needed to be a certain way. And um yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is such a diverse place. I never felt really I never felt like an outsider, I guess, in due to like culture and ethnicity and all that. I was kind of a dork in school, so like felt like an outsider in my own way for other reasons. But like because of my own like literal physical identity. I didn't really feel like an outsider. It wasn't until I went to college in a very white place that I was like, oh shit, I am so different from everybody. And feeling there that I kind of had to change the way that I was. Not even, and even I grew up speaking English. My family did not teach me Spanish. I had to go freaking live in Spain to learn Spanish. And at the same time, there were phrases that my family would use just growing up. These are the phrases that, I don't know, they would say to communicate when we were in trouble or trying to tell us something or whatever, and I still knew some Spanish. And I remember I was 21 years old and I didn't know the English word for comal because in our household, it was always comal. And I didn't know what that was in English. And I had a comal when I was in college, and in my house, I had just graduated and I was in subletting a house with different roommates that summer after I graduated. And I woke up one morning, went to the kitchen, and somebody had made scrambled eggs on my comal and had left it soaking in the sink. And I was like, what the fuck? And I was like, oh my God, is my comal ruined? Is this ruined? Oh my God. And I clean it up, all of this stuff. And nobody else was home at the time. I didn't know who it was. And I just like wrote this note saying like, hey, this is a special pan. I don't know what it's called in English, but like, don't leave this soaking in the sink, please. And like, please don't use this to cook scrambled eggs. I remember going to another friend of mine later and being like, this thing just happened. I don't know what it's called. It's called a comal in Spanish. And he was like, what does it look like? What do you mean? And I was telling him, and he's like, oh, that's a cast iron skillet. And I was like, cool, cast iron skillet. Now I know the phrase in fucking English. And it's like, here I am, 21 years old. English is my first language, but I still have this like, I don't know what this is called in English, like this is what it's always been in my household is a comal. Like, yeah. So that was such a weird thing to realize. Oh, not everybody knows what this word is. Everybody growing up around me knew what it was, like again, in Los Angeles, most people know at least a little bit of Spanish. And so like having to think about like, I don't know what this is in English.
It was a cultural shock, huh?
Oh yeah. Oh
Where
yeah.
where did you go to college?
I went to college in the Pacific Northwest
Okay.
at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma,
Okay.
Washington. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just these weird just like instances of even me being second generation in the United States, growing up speaking English, but still having these like cultural barriers and realizing I have to learn how to speak this language or, present myself in one way versus another. And yeah, I mean, I think in the coffee industry, it's really interesting. And I would love to kind of get some insight from you of what your experience was. I assume you started off as a barista, as many people do. And, as you mentioned feeling like, you weren't hipster enough or didn't know like the right music. And it is such a freaking scene, right? Like it's such a weird, it's
It's
such a
wild.
scene. Yeah. And I'm curious, what was that like for you to get into? Yeah. What was that like culturally for you?
Yeah. I'll step back a little bit to
Hmm.
give some contrast, but my first legal job was McDonald's.
Okay.
My best friend and I at that point were looking for a job in high school, which is not common for people to work during high school. I mean,
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
here. Uh, we just wanted money and, you
Yeah.
know, have a job. And so we both applied to the same McDonald's. He was born and raised in the US, but was second generation. And I was, of course, I had been in the States maybe for I don't know how many years. But
Yeah.
anyway, we both went applied. We both got the job. My accent was stronger at that point,
Hmm.
was more pronounced.
Hmm.
So they told me, you're going to be in the kitchen. You're not going to be
Mm.
customer facing. And that was one of the first times in my life where I was like, I mean, not, I guess in like the more professional space
Yeah.
where I felt like, oh shit,
Yeah.
okay, I guess I'll be in the kitchen. And in the
Yeah.
kitchen is where all like the Mexican moms were.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So again, it was like this time again that I experienced in elementary school, being friends with the janitors that only spoke, and they were mostly like moms, right? So again, I'm in, years later, I'm being put in the kitchen with Mexican moms who don't
Yeah.
speak English. And I'm like, all right, these are my people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't be on drive-through or I can't be on the cashier. And I was there for 2 years, I think. And I was always in the kitchen,
Mm.
always in the kitchen. Um,
And then was your friend placed then in like quote unquote front of house, like cashier and yeah.
yeah, so he was front of house. He was on the drive-through. And then I was on the kitchen, and my shifts were like hell. So I was,
Mm.
you know, being the last one to close, you're always cleaning everything.
Yeah.
And everything is full of grease. Like,
Yeah.
I want to put McDonald's on blast. I mean, I saw some gnarly shit. I saw some gnarly shit. Um, but I was the one cleaning at like 10 p.m., 11 p.m. during high school with hot water because that's the only way you can get the grease off.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was wild. Years later, in my mind, like that just stood there. Like I need to work on my accent because I'm not gonna get anywhere if my accent continues to be as pronounced as it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, I can't tell. I went to a
Yeah.
very Latin, I would say mostly Mexican high school, actually, in Tucson.
Mm-hmm.
So I spoke Spanish in high school most of the time.
Can we
And
touch on that a little bit? Okay, because then when did you guys move to Tucson?
so we moved to Tucson during my sophomore year of high school.
Okay. Was
So,
this also work, like
yeah,
job? Okay.
yeah,
Was it also through this same church organization?
exactly.
Okay.
Um, so when you were in Tucson, I don't know if I think you kind of did experience the South Side. So the South Side of Tucson is basically where I grew up. I did
Okay.
not see much of hip Tucson until
Yeah.
post college, really.
Yeah.
And mostly because of coffee. But I grew up in the South Side, went to a very Mexican school.
Mm-hmm.
I would say out of my class, maybe 5% went to college. And out of that 5%, maybe 1% graduated college.
Okay. Yeah.
A lot of them were also illegal and were going
Mm-hmm.
to high school here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there was no way for them to even keep going educationally speaking. A lot of them ended up in construction, which is very common here in
Totally.
Tucson, or another industry. So, and a lot of my friends got deported. Till this day, a lot of my
Mm-hmm.
friends are in Nogales or in
Mm-hmm.
Hermosillo, um, working. Some of their families are still here. So some of my closest friends that I actually played soccer with
Hmm.
are now in the other side of the border.
Yeah.
So that was also devastating to experience
Yeah.
as a young kid. Like, oh, have you guys heard of X, Y, and Z? And they're like, oh, they got deported.
Mm.
And it was like, what? So that
And so
was
this was happening while you were like in high school?
in high school. While I was in high school, while I was in college and post
Yeah.
college. It
Yeah.
happened all throughout.
Yeah.
Mostly because of the level of exposure. They went to get a job at a construction
Yeah.
company and they were probably taken there. So that was also just wild. Anyway, fast forward to coffee. I was in college. I was going to the U of A. My sister randomly invited me to a latte or throwdown, which I had no idea what that was. And I don't even know how she saw it. I need to ask her because I
I
don't
was gonna
even
say,
know.
was she working for a cafe or
No,
anything?
she still doesn't drink specialty coffee. I don't know how she saw that. I think it was just meant to be in the universe where she was just
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah,
hey,
for
there's this
sure.
event at a local roaster. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
So we show up to Presta,
Hmm.
the first staff location, which is where the roaster used to be. And there's this event. Everybody's happy, everybody's dancing, free coffee, free merch, latte art
Hmm.
throwdowns,
Hmm.
free beer. And
Yeah.
I was just like, what is this?
Yeah.
And for the first time in a while, I felt welcomed, though I was
Mm.
different, you
Yeah.
know.
And this was in a
Um,
different part of Tucson than like where your
exact,
community was. Yeah.
exactly. I was in a different place, different people. It felt like a different world that I had never
Yeah.
seen before.
Yeah.
And I remember falling in love with the aspect of community.
Hmm.
Like that is what grasped my attention.
Hmm.
The next day after the throwdown, I'm like the first customer. I'm like there wanting to try coffee because I'm like,
Yeah.
what did I just experience last night?
Yeah.
And I remember having a shot of Colombia on espresso, and I was like, what is this? This is not that great. This is wild. I remember it was like a honey processed coffee on espresso, and that was like a punch in the face. I was like, what is this? And I just kept going and going and
Yeah.
going, and I just became a regular. Eventually, I became a barista. They gave me an
Hmm.
opportunity to be the barista, and I was the only minority. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, like
That's so fascinating to me because Tucson has a massive Mexican population.
this was probably 12 years ago, and specialty
Okay.
coffee was still not very present, even within Mexican culture.
Yeah.
Actually, so years later, I went back to Hermosillo and hosted
Hmm.
one of the first coffee cuppings in Sonora
Hmm.
and in my hometown
Mm.
because specialty coffee was, I mean, you know this, the South always looks to the North. And so Tucson,
Yeah.
Presta was actually putting specialty coffee in the radar of Sonora.
Hmm.
So it was really cool for me to go back to my hometown and say, hey, here's this, Mexican kid working in coffee.
Yeah.
I want to host a cupping with you all. This is what
Yeah.
I get to try. Because as you know, Mexico, there is there is a law where you can't really import coffee from other countries.
Hmm.
So all they get to try is Mexican coffee. So I was able to bring
Hmm.
coffees from other origins and cup
Hmm.
coffee with them and show them what else exists, right? Going back to your question, even though I was welcomed and even though I felt a sense of like belonging, I was still the outsider.
Yeah.
I was still the kid that was a minority.
Hmm.
I was still the dude that no regulars knew, and everybody's
Hmm.
questioning who is this new guy.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, so I had the feeling of having to perform, having to fit,
Yeah.
having to be like everybody else
Yeah.
because that's the way that I'm gonna be. I didn't want it to have another McDonald's experience.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
want to be the barista and never cashier.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be in charge of like cold brew production and never be,
Yeah.
customer facing.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, I need to figure out how to, fit.
Fit in.
So even like the way I would dress, like the music that I
Yeah.
would listen to is completely opposite than what would get played and how people would dress up. So I had to change once again,
Yeah.
David has to change to fit in.
Yeah.
And I feel like I experienced that multiple times in my life where David had to transform who he was in order to fit into this existing community or into this existing culture or into this existing, you name it,
Yeah.
to belong, to to find a sense of purpose once again. And with those changes, there's things you let go. You
Mm-hmm.
know, yes, you become something new, but you're letting part of you go.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most challenging part of adapting, or there's a word that you used earlier.
Assimilation.
Exactly.
Assimilating. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There in that assimilating process, you're letting go of a part of who you are, of who you truly are,
Yeah.
to acquire a new taste of music, to acquire a new
Mm-hmm.
taste of clothing, to acquire a new taste of flavor profiles in coffee, because you're not
Mm-hmm.
used to Ethiopian
Mm-hmm.
coffee. You're used to freaking Dolca instant with your
Yeah.
grandma. Like,
Yeah.
so you're letting go of all these things to belong and to
Yeah.
find a new sense of purpose, a new community.
I think that's something that like I feel like so many people can relate to that in different ways, and yet it's like so difficult to explain what that feels like and the impact of that. Because as you are describing this, I mean, I'm just like having all of these memories kind of downloading of like, oh yeah, I remember that too. I remember this. I remember like this moment or in this space or this cafe feeling, yeah, like such an outsider and being like, I have to change to like make this pleasant for me because it's
Mm,
so hard and it's not pleasant. And I have to change who I am or how I show up to make this easier and more
yeah.
pleasant. And it's really, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard because for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, it's the same story where it's almost like a two-step process where you need to first earn the right to be in that community.
Yeah.
Then you change who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to perform. You have to be a good
Yeah.
barista
Yeah.
in order to change, in order to
Yeah.
stay and then change. You have to be a good soccer player to stay and then
Mm-hmm.
change. You have to be a good student to stay and then change.
Yeah.
So there's always a performance um, attribution to assimilation,
Yeah.
because otherwise, why assimilate? You know, you're not
Yeah.
good enough.
Yeah.
So there's always this, and maybe this is why we're perfectionists in everything we do now, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
we have to perform in
Yeah.
order to assimilate what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
We have to be up there and be considered equal.
Mm-hmm.
Then we change. Then we
Yeah.
adopt. Then we assimilate. Which now that I think about it, it's like wild. I never thought about this
Yeah.
until now. And that happened in coffee. And now, years later that I'm in green coffee, it's the exact same story.
Mm.
The exact
Hmm.
same story within the same industry. There's a
Yeah.
niche of salespeople in green
Yeah.
coffee that look a certain way, that speak a certain way, that behave a certain way. And I don't fit in that.
Yeah.
I'm not that, I'm posting about memes,
Yeah.
you know, and then about the sea market,
Yeah.
hours later. But now looking back to everything that we talk about, all of those experiences, all of those stories make who I am now.
100%.
And I don't regret any of those things, as hard as they were, as painful as they were, as transformative as they were. They taught me something.
Yeah.
And now, there's parts of my story that I haven't talked about, like becoming a citizen, what that looked like. But
Mm-hmm.
now I realize there's privilege that I've acquired
Mm-hmm.
consciously or unconsciously. And now I question, how do I use this to
Yeah.
help others who
Yeah.
don't have that privilege, who don't have, because I was there.
Yeah.
I've been there. I know
Yeah.
what that feels like.
And this is another piece of like why I want to be talking about these things, because it is the recognition of like, oh, I have this privilege of having been born in the United States, having a US passport. Like everybody in my immediate family are US citizens and are not at risk of any right now, like, persecution or anything. Who knows how things are going to go in this world? But it is like, okay, how do I use that privilege to talk about this stuff, to bring light to the reality of what's happening, and hopefully in some way provide help for others who don't have that privilege, information to people who aren't aware or don't understand what's going on, and then bringing in other voices who are in a position of having this privilege of like safety, and bringing them into the conversation and allowing them to also share their experiences, their stories, and yeah, putting this information out there, because like I said in the beginning, like there are immigrant communities everywhere. Even if we don't think they are there, they are there. And I want folks to understand how prevalent this is and how many people are being impacted by everything that's been happening in the United States. And it didn't just happen overnight, but it has been this like gradual progression to where we are, which I think also a lot of people are not aware of. There's a huge portion of people who live in the United States who are living with so much anxiety every day. And I've had a lot of conversations with people who express that, and the toll that it takes on your well-being, your mental health, and then your physical health. And so many of these communities just kind of deal with this in silence because they don't feel like they can share it with anybody because it doesn't feel safe. And even, you sharing like these were traumatic moments, maybe in the midst of it, you don't realize that, like as a 9-year-old child, you don't realize that. But in reflection, through therapy, all of these things, realizing like, oh yeah, that was a traumatic moment. That was my, and it wasn't just like my emotional well-being, but like my physical well-being, like experienced trauma. Yeah, I don't know. It's this word assimilation is so interesting, and how we are tasked to assimilate to some like picture of what somebody in the United States is, which is so strange to me. It's like, how did like this is what became the dominantly accepted ideal, quote unquote, of assimilation in the US.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with that thought, but this is like I feel like I go on these deep dive like streams of thought about all of these different things, and when I learn about other people's experiences in the United States from different cultures, and thinking about my own too. I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like once I got into my 30s, I was like, yo, fuck all of that. I'm not trying to like assimilate anymore. I am just going to show up as like who I am, how I am, and whether that's in the way I dress, the language I use, the mannerisms I have. It's like I just can't, my like beingness cannot take trying to like change who I am in these spaces anymore. And I don't want to force myself into that. And I don't really want to force myself into relationships that don't align with that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think also life experiences and maturity and age, contribute to this desire to stay true to ourselves,
Yeah.
because we've been for so long having to change and
Yeah.
be complacent and please others. And we were talking about this right before this podcast started. Like that's been an entire story.
Yeah.
And now it's like, and I know there's multiple factors that add to that, but there's now this desire to just be who we are, and in
Yeah.
hopes that that'll be okay, that that'll be
Yeah.
enough, that that'll be safe, that that'll be worthy of
Mhm.
belonging and
Mhm.
just being.
Mhm.
And it's crazy to me that a lot of people also don't have that privilege.
Mhm. Totally.
um, the fact that you and I can now relax about being who we
Mhm.
are is also a
Mhm.
privilege
Mhm.
that a lot of people don't have,
Yeah.
which is wild to think of.
Yeah. There's also this duality at play, and I don't know how if this is something that you relate to, but this phrase in Spanish, ni de aquí ni de allá, right? Not from here, not from, nor from there. And that's something that when I am in Mexico, I'm like, okay, yes, I am Mexican, but like I'm not from here, like I
Mm.
didn't grow up here. And there are things that I don't understand on like a cultural level too, because it's like I didn't grow up around this. And that is something that I've kind of like, I think for a lot of my upbringing and my 20s of trying to figure out how I fit into these spaces. Um, and now kind of just being like, no, I'm from both of these. And I'm going to be both of the, like, there are going to be aspects from both and all places that I bring with me everywhere.
Mm.
And it's okay that I don't really understand all of the little like cultural references in every single place and scenario.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I
Mm-hmm.
still feel, though I've lived the majority of my life now in the US, I still don't feel American.
Yeah,
There's still a lot of things that I don't know culturally that people
sure.
make references to, and I'm like, I don't know that movie. And people are
Yeah.
like, what do you
Oh,
know?
yeah.
And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I just haven't watched it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure.
uh, or like songs or artists or, whatever it may be. I'm still ignorant to a lot of things. And
Yeah.
now more than ever, I'm okay with that. And I
Mm-hmm.
rather ask than assume now.
Yeah.
And I think also, I mean, it's also just part of my personality. Like I'm wanting to learn and from both cultures still. There's
Yeah.
even, when I go back to Mexico or hang out with people who do live there, I'm still learning from those people. I'm still
Yeah.
learning from those cultures and those communities to continue to influence who I am today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to touch on something kind of going back a little bit, but are you able to share what your pathway to citizenship was like and how that kind of came to being?
Yeah. So, because of my dad and his job within a religious organization, we were able to thankfully apply for a religious visa,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very specific way to have a path towards citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
So we were residents after a while, and that process is tedious. I mean, you have to go back to Mexico, apply. You're just a young kid, you don't know what's going on. It's a
Yeah.
lot of money, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of savings. You have to work really hard to even just have the ability to financially get past that. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a sponsored by any
Mm-hmm.
means. Once you acquire that, then you're eligible for a citizenship, which once we were in college, my sister and I decided to apply for before my parents even did. My sister, more than I, saw that benefit. So I,
Mm-hmm.
I can give her the credit for really just stepping forward and saying, hey, we should both do this. Like there's benefit in both of us being citizens.
Yeah.
And if you're in college, I don't know if this is still true, but because we were students, the US government actually subsidized the cost of becoming a citizen.
Hmm.
So my sister and I just went to a refugee center here in Tucson where they helped us fill out the paperwork and apply for the citizenship. And we both studied our ass off to learn the 100 questions you have to memorize.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I did not remember any of that, like history or whatever from elementary or middle school.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know how many people know this. It's a lot of questions.
Probably 98% of US born citizens don't actually know the information that's on that test.
Yeah, it's wild. So you memorize those 100 questions, and there's online resources for you to take tests and really just memorize. I mean, literally, that's all you're doing is
Yeah.
memorizing. And by you memorizing the questions, you prove that you can be a good citizen.
Yeah.
It's a fucked up system. I don't know how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I show up to my test during college, and the person realized that I spoke perfect English. And she was like, "Well, this is going to be an easy one for you."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "Yeah, but not for my mom, not for
Mm.
my dad,
Hmm.
you know?" And it was a really interesting moment where now I'm experiencing privilege for the first time of
Hmm.
like, oh, I can do this in a heartbeat because
Yeah.
I was going to college. If I were to go back to college now, I would be like, how do I study? But
Yeah. 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 Oh, totally.
at that point, everything was fresh. My brain was working 100%. I was studying 24/7, so learning 100 questions wasn't a struggle. But then I was like, how are my parents gonna do this?
Yeah.
Like, they still don't read English. They still don't speak
Yeah.
English. So anyway, I if you get 6 questions so out of those 100 questions, you only get
Hmm.
asked 10 randomized questions. So out of 100 questions, you only get asked 10 questions, which is mind
Yeah.
blowing.
Yeah.
And if you get, I think if you get more than 5 wrong, I think you have to retest or whatever. But
Yeah.
if you get 6 questions in a row right, you automatically pass because you
Hmm.
already surpassed the threshold for
Yeah.
incorrect answers. So I remember just passing the 6 questions right, and then the officer just starts talking to me, getting to know me.
Hmm.
And I was like, I had to do this to earn your trust for you to
Hmm.
actually get to know me.
Hmm.
It was a really weird moment of like,
Yeah.
okay, now that I pass, I can talk to you, right? Or now that I
Yeah.
can pass, again, performed
Yeah.
to a certain standard within society or within legal structures, then I can experience normalcy. Then I can experience assimilation. It was weird, but
Yeah.
yeah, I became a citizen. I didn't really know how to celebrate. Like, I remember going
Yeah.
to the ceremony and holding a flag, and took a photo with my parents, and that was it. There was
Hmm.
no actual celebration.
Yeah.
I just didn't know. It just felt like something else I did in life. It didn't
Yeah.
feel like, oh wow, now I now I can vote. It
Yeah.
didn't really feel
Now I
like,
have freedom.
yeah, it didn't feel like anything really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now as a father, I see a lot more privilege, of course, within that. Now that I'm a professional, I see a lot more privilege within that. Now that I can vote, I see a lot more privilege within that. But in that time of my life,
Yeah. It was a thing to do, a box to check of like, all right, that's done now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Don't tell this to anyone, but I actually don't even know where that certificate is.
I mean, you just said it on a recording, so I don't.
It's funny. I'm like, I don't hold my achievements. My mom has like my college degree framed,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she's like, "Where's your diploma?" I'm like, "I don't know, mom. Like that doesn't define me."
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, I feel like that's what parents do though too, is especially I think with these kinds of histories, it's it is a big deal. It's an accomplishment, you know.
Oh,
I
for
assume
sure.
that with your kids, you know, you're going to be same way. I don't know if there's like a kindergarten certificate or graduation or something, but like that, you know, maybe being hung up at some point. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me was a way to dignify their work and their hard work of
Mhm.
bringing us to this
Mhm.
country. I think that was the only motivation really from
Yeah.
my side was okay. Going to college and get and becoming a citizen were the two things that I could do to dignify their hard work. Am I proud of those things? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
And then they later went through the same process to become citizens. And
mhm,
I assume it was a much more difficult process for them just because of the language barriers and
for sure.
everything. Did they have to take the test multiple times?
No, no, thankfully,
Okay.
um, I think my sister and I taking the test really motivated and encouraged them to do so,
Yeah.
which is something that I didn't even realize. But they both studied together as a couple and took the test and passed and did a great job. But it wasn't easy.
Yeah, of
They
course.
they still don't speak English and they passed the
Yeah.
test. You know, um, they prove that they can memorize 100 questions in their
Yeah.
non-native tongue and non-native language.
Yeah. Which is just like, you know, the more that we learn about this process of how the process has come to being to become a citizen or get any sort of status in the United States, of how these borders were established, how all of this stuff has evolved. What I'm starting to now realize, and I think state more confidently, is that this has really just become a business.
Hmm.
You know, everybody has to pay into the system. Everybody, if you do it wrong, you have to pay extra fees and fines. It's a weird business. And the amount of money, too, that the United States spends on maintaining this whole system is just like insane. It's insane. Not just like the paperwork side of things and all of that, but quite literally the physical work in quote unquote maintaining a border and like what that means and all of that. And it's just like, for what, you know? I hope to have the right opportunity to share a little bit about things that I learned when I was in southern Arizona and in the Tucson area earlier this year, and um, doing the work I was doing there, because there are some things that I'm just like, what are we spending this money for? Like, this is insane and so stupid. Yeah. It's a weird, like I said, I'm starting, this has really only happened in the last week that I'm forming this idea of like, oh, it's a business,
Hmm.
you know, is what this has been turned into. And yeah, I mean, like you just said, your parents don't even speak English. So what is this test even for? Oh, to collect on a fee. Okay, got it.
I mean, literally,
Yeah.
that's. I mean, if you ask me right now, do I remember those questions? No.
Yeah.
100% transactional, capitalizing on people to do this.
Yeah. Do you remember how much that cost at all?
Um, I think it was about $600,
Mm-hmm.
but this was 12 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
13 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the cost is today.
Yeah. I also don't know like what, and this is a question I'm going to be kind of posing to people, and I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I wonder if it's even possible to become citizens in the same way today as you did, like through the like
Oh,
religious visa, and then becoming residents, and then becoming citizens, and having an actual like path forward through that. I don't know if that's still something that's possible.
yeah, I don't know either. I would assume yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the college or being a student part, but I would assume that everything else is still the same because I know there's still people getting um
Okay.
that status. Yeah, I would have to do some
Yeah.
research.
Yeah.
I feel like there has to be a part two because we only
I
covered
know.
so much.
I know. I know. Well, no, there are definitely so throughout like the evolution of this podcast, there are definitely people who are going to be coming on multiple times because I think that there are so many, and this is again the whole premise of this thing is like everybody has many different stories that they can share and talk about of how it's formed them to who they are today. And so, yes, I definitely feel like we will be chatting again at some point in the future and sharing more. And
Yeah,
so,
I think
yeah,
I think coffee forward. My introduction to coffee and what that opened up for me was a Pandora box
yeah,
where I started to deconstruct myself as a
yeah.
person.
Hmm.
And I think that develops into so many things of who I am today, but
Yeah.
we can dive into that later.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm trying to, there are this season has a theme. I'm still not sure if I'm going to keep like a theme kind of a structure for future seasons, but depending on how some of these conversations go, that may be something that happens. So, yeah, I think you'll definitely be coming on again and chatting more and sharing more. But
Thank you.
yeah.
I didn't want to self-invite, but there's
No,
so much
not
to
at
talk
all.
about.
Yes. Oh, I already thought about that before we even got on. I was like, I feel like, yeah, David and I could talk about a lot of stuff, and there's so much to, I think, who you are that I was like, yeah, he's going to come on again at some point. I already knew that.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Yeah.
me. Thank you for your time and yeah,
Thank
just
you.
creating this safe space. Yeah, these stories don't get shared very often,
Yeah.
and I'm glad to have a place to do so.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for participating. Thank you for your time. Yeah. I think that I just want to be able to create a space and a platform for people to feel like they can share these stories because I think what happens so often is that it doesn't feel safe to show these other sides of ourselves, and it doesn't feel like we will be accepted if we show these other sides of ourselves or share these insights into who we are and our lives. And I'm just tired of that being what we accept as like normal.
Mm.
So yeah, thank you for coming on, thank you for participating. And thank you all for listening. These are our other stories. My name is Madeleine Longoria Garcia. You can listen to this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Take care, and we'll see you next time.